my first introduction was corn ethanol. And corn ethanol, I invented the process to remove distillers' corn oil. That process has been adopted by all corn ethanol producers. By far the biggest innovation in that space. It generates about 8% more revenue and about 8% more fuel. And some of you say that know what corn is. Say, how is that possible? Because corn is only 4% corn oil. How can you get 8% more fuel? And Chris mentioned earlier, it's not just the biomass, it's the carbon content of the biomass. It's conservation of carbon, not just conversion. So corn oil is the richest source of carbon in a kernel of corn. We get a lot more fuel for every pound of corn oil than you do from starch. And starch has losses from fermentation. So that's how we were able to get significantly more revenue and income from that feedstock. Well, that was just getting my feet wet. What did they miss in corn ethanol? They missed a lot, 8%. And if you don't have that technology, you're bankrupt. Next phase is, what did they miss in cellulosic fuels? What's the richest source of carbon in biomass? It's lignin. And nobody's harvesting it and converting it. So that's where we really focused our attention. And then also biomass, pointed out at our table, the three completely separate components, hemicellulose, cellulose, and pulp. They don't all convert using the same methods or efficiently using the same methods. So what we do is we separate first, just like we separate corn oil, just process it separately from starch. We do the same with biomass. How do we separate it? We use 100-year-old pulping systems. So the same way that you would digest biomass, woody biomass largely to make paper, you cook the wood chip to separate the lignin from the pulp. We do the same thing. So Valmet is our partner on the digestion step. We have our own patented process. It's an organosolve process. So we use the same equipment, but we change the solvent. We use a butanol water, mostly, solution to cook the wood chips. So we're using traditional, proven technology on the front end to separate pulp, which is largely cellulose, from lignin. Now, cellulose is a glucan molecule, just like starch is a glucan molecule. Glucan converts to glucose. So we take the pulp from our standard pulping equipment and we put the pulp in a standard ethanol system. The same exact system you would use to convert corn. The same equipment. Those tanks don't know the difference between corn and pulp. The difference is we change the enzyme. So starch uses a different enzyme than cellulose. We use a cellulase enzyme. Now, some companies have struggled to commercialize cellulosic ethanol, and it's because they tried to use an exotic enzyme to convert the cellulose. Why do they need an exotic enzyme? It's because lignin does such an amazing job of protecting the cellulose. Our solution is remove the armor. Take the lignin away from the cellulose and convert it. And then virtually any cellulase enzyme works on our product. So we use a conventional front-end system. We use a conventional conversion system to make sugar. And that sugar can go a lot of different ways. On my slides, I show ethanol because that's an easy pathway. But there are other pathways for sugar. You can go sugar straight to jet. And you can go sugar to ethanol, and you go ethanol to jet. So there's plenty of pathways. The key is to be able to make sugar cost effectively, and that's what we do. Now, this is where the biggest innovation occurred, is the lignin recovery and conversion. We have 5 different pathways to convert lignin, but the one we're starting with is the one that's easiest. This whole system has to be financeable, which means third-party engineering companies have to review our drawings and systems and say, that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense, right? It has to be, so that's what we're doing here. We take the lignin, and of our 5 different pathways, the one we're commercializing first converts the lignin into an ester. How do you make an ester? Well, what is our experience? We have an experienced company doing digestion and Valmet. We have Praj as our ethanol partner. How do you make an ester? Well, our chief engineer, Rahul Babali, He built 22 biodiesel facilities. What's biodiesel? It's a methyl ester. You take a fat, used cooking oil or soybean oil, you mix it with methanol and you create an ester. He built 22 of those facilities. How do we make a lignin fatty ester? We mix fat, but instead of methanol, we mix it with lignin and we esterify it. So we have the world's best person internal at making biodiesel. And so we're using that same concept to convert lignin into an ester. Well, what's so important about esters? Well, there's a known way to convert esters into jet fuel and diesel. They're called HEFA facilities. It stands for hydroprocessed esters and fatty acids. There's a bunch of them built. Oil companies, Marathon Petroleum, Phillips 66, Chevron, Neste. There's a ton of these facilities where they've been converting conventional oil refineries into HEFA facilities. Some people call them renewable diesel facilities, but they're the same, one and the same, just different name. I like the name HEFA because it's more graphic about our product, the ester. All of those other systems operate only on fats. They're using used cooking oil or soybean oil, and they're all saying the same thing. The fats are too scarce and they're too expensive. Fats are today about $1,000 a ton. 3 years ago, they were $1,800 a ton. That's $6 a gallon just for the cooking oil. It's too expensive and it's too scarce. We're starting with wood that can be harvested. It's being put in landfills in some cases, but certainly $100 a ton, 1/10 of the price of fat. So we're taking and it has a much better carbon footprint than fats. Soybeans, you're in the field every year planting and harvesting. Wood, you harvest once every 10, 20, 50 years. So we have a much better carbon footprint. So all of these steps that we have are pretty much off-the-shelf systems. The digestion, ethanol conversion, esterification, and HEFA processing. And the sum allows us to achieve about 140 gallons on a gasoline gallon equivalent basis per ton of wood. That's a lot. Yeah, it's $7 a gallon, which is about what a conservative price for advanced low carbon fuels. That's almost $1,000 for every ton of wood that we process. So how does that compare to other industries that are processing wood, like pulp and paper? Pulp and paper generates about $250 for every ton that goes into their facility. We're 3 to 4 times more than conventional pulping. Why? Because they only process pulp. When you convert the lignin as well, you substantially increase revenue and value. So the next logical question is, can you help those guys too? And the answer is yes. We don't need to install a pulping system, they have one. We don't need to find a pulp market, they have one. But we can recover their lignin and convert it into fuel and greatly assist that industry as well. If we just recovered half of their lignin and convert it into fuel, it would almost double the revenues that they get out of their facility. So where are we with our commercialization? See, Ben limited me to 3 slides, so I figured I'd talk a lot on the first one. Commercialization, it's all about converting the ester. That's where we are today. Converting that ester, making sure, validating that our ester will process in conventional HEFA facilities. In February, we got a very significant investment from Marathon Petroleum. Their investment was take the world's best renewable R&D lab for hydroprocessing. They gave us this lab as their investment. It is insane. In this section of the lab, we have over 30 reactors, 200 to 400 milliliters. Each one of those can do about 2 liters a day of of conversion of esters. So we've hired their staff. We're powering it now for our conversion. We have been doing our ester conversion at 2 locations in Sweden and 1 in Tulsa. And I always told people those are among the best labs in the world until this thing came along. This is the best lab in the world. And this is the side where we do 30 different reactors. We can test a lot of different catalysts and formulations. But on the other side of the lab, we have a larger facility. We want to have this operating by the end of the year, where this can produce a barrel a day of fuels. So they have used this previously to prove sugar to jet fuel, right? We make sugars out of the cellulose. They made a barrel a day for 5 years of SAF in this side of the system from the cellulose, from the sugar. Now we're doing it on the lignin. That's it.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you very much. I think the microphones are still over there. So I'll kick it off with a question first for both, whoever wants to answer, and then start, you in the audience, start thinking about questions here. Sort of thinking big picture, the commercial aviation industry adopted this long-term net zero carbon goal for air transport by 2050. Kind of like reconfirmed, I suppose, the industry's commitment to reduce CO2 emissions, sort of in line with the Paris agreements. It's gonna be tough for the industry to do that by 2050. How will sustainable aviation fuel, specifically from woody biomass, be a part of that solution? What are the kind of pain points across the value chain to make that happen? And whoever wants to address it. That's great.
I will start because he talk much longer than me. And I really respect the rules. So, and I really like the fact that you mentioned, in fact, the lignin. It's something that we are exploring as well, to take lignin and convert it. I believe it will be more difficult for us lignosulfonate, but lignin should be a good feedstock with the energy. And in terms of ratio, because that's not something which I mentioned, we are lower in our conversion. We are reaching, in fact, 70 gallons per ton of biomass. Agree with your price, all depends on the incentives or not, and the states, and all these topics. But we have a biogenic CO2 as well, on which we are working in order to reconvert this biogenic CO2 into fuels. So to answer the question, it's clear that aviation is one of the most difficult industry to decarbonize. Of course, there are some activities related to hydrogen planes, but it doesn't really work, or electrical planes. What the aviation is doing clearly is working on doing a lot of mini steps on looking at the instruments, how they could be electrically delivered and so on, to pull less fuel. But clearly there is a huge market. What is really insane is that when you look at, let's say, the target, at the trajectory, 400 biorefineries need to be built in the US to meet the demand. We will never be able to do it. In fact, it's not from the feedstock perspective, it's much more from the skills perspective. Having enough welders, having enough cranes. When I was working in the water business, everybody was talking, okay, now membranes are available for desalination. When we looked at the quantity of cubic meter of gallons to be produced, the number of membranes, there was not enough membrane fabrication available to reach the goal. I believe that for SAF it's the same, but it's much more on developing projects. And obviously developing projects is not about only welders, EPC firms, but it's also about capital which is available. And it's considered as first of a kind, when in fact some technologies are more than 100 years old. So the conversion for us to produce SAF, the most sustainable way, is to use our technology, which is de-risking, in fact, the front end of converting the biomass into a clean hydrogen syngas. And after the back end is something which is available on the market. In June 2025, for people in Europe, you can go, there is a great event in Germany related to Fischer-Tropsch process, because Fischer-Tropsch is 100 years old. So in fact, the technology exists. The combination not been implemented at scale. And obviously, the key challenge is to get funding in order to reach FID, so financial investment decisions. So the key step for us in developing this project is to start from the feedstock, which is a critical part. Finding a good feedstock, sustainable feedstock, consistent feedstock, enough quantity to have a cost-effective project. And then, step by step, you, in fact, climb the risking by finding the site, developing your offtake, developing your permit to be sure that you won't face any crazy topics like, I work on a project and we are too close to an airport. So, in the stack was too high related to the regulation from FAA. So we have to be sure that we take all the steps, but there is a level of emergency. So what is critical is to get help and to work on this all together, from feedstock, from offtake, and funding, which is clearly the most difficult for us.
All right, thank you very much. And I think in the interest of time, David, I'll just direct the next question to you first to answer maybe, and then if you have more to add, certainly can. But what makes one location more attractive than another from the project siting perspective? And really our motivation here is how do we position Michigan to take advantage of this opportunity and be kind of a leader in this space here in the States?
Yep, this is fun. Yep. We designed our system, or one of the great features in it, we can operate pretty much anywhere. We're independent. We can use biomass for combined heat and power to operate our facility, which means we can operate just about anywhere. The only exception is the hydro treating part where we need hydrogen. And so if we don't have hydrogen available, you would need to do that step somewhere else. But we do have byproducts that can be converted to hydrogen as well. But that's one of the nice features of our system is we can build the front-end digester with just the ethanol system and ship the esters to all of these other facilities that are already built. We don't have to invest in a HEPA facility when there are tons of them already out there. So that's the only step that we may or may not do it, Michigan, but probably, I think, you have plenty of gas here. But other countries like Africa or wherever, where they don't have the infrastructure, that's our model, is to ship the esters somewhere else and finish that elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you. Natalie, do you want to address that?
Yeah, for us, we need to be close to the feedstock. Obviously, we need to find players who are able to aggregate. We can work, obviously, on mixed waste, so we can have forestry waste and agriculture waste. We can work on campaigns, saying, okay, 6 months we work with this type of feedstock, and 6 months we work with another type of feedstock. We don't want to switch every day, every hour. There are other processes which are working this way, but it's not what we want to do, because we need something which is consistent at the level of the syngas. So the consistency of the feedstock is key. What is important for us is that we don't need to pull in electricity from the grid. We can even be electricity independent. I'm working on a project in California where the electricity cost is 32 cents per kilowatt hour, and there is enough feedstock. So we are developing the project to produce enough, in fact, syngas, reusing, in fact, different side streams in order to feed motor and be able to produce electricity. So feedstock for us, of course, there are some scenarios where we would like to get close to refineries, and that can be essential because we can use some available assets at a refinery level for distillation, isomerization, and be able to partner instead of doing our own final upgrading and isomerization. Obviously, if there is close by an offtake for biogenic CO2, that's even better. So from feedstock is essential. If we want to do methanol for maritime, but the question is aviation, obviously we need to be close to the water, but otherwise it's feedstock.
Thank
And
you.
post-trust can help on feedstocks.
All right, thank you very much. We've got a question out here in the field.
Well, actually, Nathalie, your feedstock comment is timely because I wanted to ask a question to both of you, actually, about the impact of feedstock supply chains on financing projects, which in your case are billions of dollars, right? So your intake of feedstock is enormous, right? Millions of tons a year, except the components of those feedstocks are almost always not investment grade, right? They're small farmers, they're mid-sized sawmills, whatever they are, they've almost never got investment grade credit. So it means that almost never can you get 10 or 20-year supply agreements that are actually meaningful for finance. So in the view of the fact that you've got supply chains composed of non-investment grade components, number one, who can't supply you with long-term feedstock supply agreements, can you speak to the impact that that has on raising $1 billion or $2 billion for a SAF plant? And how do you solve that problem?
If there was only a company. Yeah, we absolutely, so our system needs to be financeable. So the system has to operate, and we have to get third-party validation on all the steps, but we also need a feasibility study that proves that we can get reliable feedstocks that meet not just our process needs, but also the pathway approval that the EPA has for the Renewable Fuel Standard or the pathway for the Renewable Energy Directive in Europe. It's absolutely essential to have feedstock sourcing, long-term agreements. A one-year agreement's not going to do us any good. We have to at least finance through the financing model. Good question.
Yeah, for us, it's clear that our discussion always starts with feedstock. The beauty of what we are doing is that we can work with a small quantity, but in that case, we will not target SAF. We will target other products. When we target SAF to be cost competitive and develop projects which are obviously $1.5 billion or above, we need to have, let's say, 1 million, 2 billion. So the smallest that we would work, and obviously the incentives will be critical. We are talking about 200 to 300,000 tons per year. On the project that we are working today and that we want to duplicate in other locations, we have been super lucky or super smart, let's say, that we managed to secure 25 years agreement with one company. So, of course, you will tell me as after risky, but this company has been on the market for as long as the short process. So, obviously, when we are working with players, we need to be sure that we have an aggregation of feedstock. And obviously, there are some companies which are providing insurance on feedstock.
All right, thank you. Another question up front.
So David, you mentioned in your talk about the cost of fatty acids, and so I work with ag also. So the question is, what are you seeing in terms of how do we reduce that fatty acid cost into your system to make that process? And is there a difference in the fatty acids that you've looked at, ag, animal? I know you mentioned cooking oils, things like that. So I wondered if you could speak to the fatty acid.
Yeah, that is definitely a constraint in our system. It's the absolute foreseeable in our system. The mandate in the U.S. for fat-derived fuels is only 3.5 billion gallons, and we use 225 billion. So we extend that fat. We more than double it by adding the lignin component. But we do know that it's going to be a constraint. So we have two ways to solve that. One, we can convert our sugars into fatty acids using the fat producing yeast, that can convert sugars into fat. So that's one way to help, but we've also licensed technology from DOE, NREL, and MIT that eliminates the need for fat, that we actually, when you're digesting the wood in that step, the lignin comes out as these small monomers and dimers, which are jet fuel right then. But then they start having these condensation reactions, and they build into these giant lignin molecules. So that process helps prevent that from happening in the digestion phase, so that when we come out, the lignin comes out as these monomers and dimers and doesn't require this, we call it a hack, esterification step, hack, to enable it to go to the next step. So we're working very aggressively. We have a 3-year development program. We're only about 7 months into it, and we're just lightning fast on that pathway, because that is an absolute foreseeable issue, is the amount of fats that are available.
All right, yeah, Britta's got a question.
Okay, we have a question from online. Please bear with me. I will do my best to summarize. The basics of it is, because of the amount that has to go in to create SAF, the question is, how much has been spent so far on developing biomass aviation fuel, and is there going to be a cap? Because it seems to be an impossible project. Going from that down then further is, in order to scale this up, how many barrels of fuel are estimated to manufacture for a long-term payoff? Sorry, big loaded question.
I mean, we're at the L2. We're gonna be have our engineering done by the end of the year. We want to start building our first facility next year. So we believe strongly that we have the economic model. We're producing $1,000 worth of fuel, and operating cost is a fraction of that. So we think we're there now. It's because we valorize lignin. Without valorizing lignin, it is very hard to do with just carbohydrates alone.
Ellie, do you want
I don't know how much the world has spent on it. I know how much we've spent, and we're ready to go.
Yeah, we are, let's say, younger company, so we are FEL, reaching FEL1, and clearly we have financial investors which are ready to invest after FID. They have worked with us on developing our financial model, showing the profitability. So clearly we have, let's say, partners which are bringing, in fact, sweat equity at this stage. So we are super lucky to have a volunteering approach in order to develop this roadmap.
All right, thank you. I think we'll do one more from the audience in the back.
So you guys have, almost all these presentations that talk about these super complex systems where you're trying to feed an inconsistent, almost junky product into it. And I didn't quite understand why that was happening. Last night I was kind of surprised to learn that in Finland you guys are harvesting like 80 or 90% of your growth, so there's no more biomass for you to find for your system. So I kind of understood that, but what I think we're missing here is in Michigan, we don't have that. We have an underutilized virgin source. So if feedstock and consistency of it is a problem for these systems, we don't have that in Michigan. We have a diverse forest. We can provide that virgin feedstock tomorrow, and to the benefit of Michigan's resource too. We need to be cutting more, not less. So I would say that it's a feedstock issue for elsewhere. It's not in Michigan. So earlier I was asking a question of what are you feeding in and how are you processing it? We have, you guys were, silver fir, for example, we're talking about it. If it's jack pine, if it's scotch pine, whatever you need, we have it in abundance in Michigan. And I brought up the fact that when Arauco came to Michigan a few years ago, people were flabbergasted because it was 1 million green tons we added to the system. We've lost 4 or 5 million green tons of capacity over the last 20 years. So I would say, we have it here. We have the producers who tomorrow provided 1 million green tons to a state-of-the-art $500 million particle plant who hasn't wanted for wood one time. So if you're talking about somebody said 50,000 tons to feed a project, that's nothing. I mean, so I would say don't don't thumb your nose at a virgin product that is only gonna stabilize your system. So we have it here. And I understand that that's maybe not what you're facing in other places, but we have an underutilized resource, a very diverse one, and a willingness from the suppliers. If you show them that they have a market, they will fill it. Michigan has done, our loggers are amazing, forestry folks are awesome. So don't think you can't ask for something very specific, and a lot of it, 'cause we have it.
That's wonderful. You have a sentence in here, it's, we don't know what we don't know. So obviously, that's why I came here today and yesterday and on Tuesday to learn about what is happening in Michigan. Because we are a small company, so we started, let's say Gulf Coast, which is our comfort zone, and step by step we discover other locations, and that's where we want to get help on understanding the feedstock. And when I say we need something which is consistent, the technology for us is pretty agnostic, but we don't want to work on plastics and woody biomass the second day. We need to have, what is important for us is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen composition of the feedstock, and mostly, in fact, woody biomass. We find something which is pretty consistent. And the ash content, obviously, with bark will be different when we process bagasse, so which obviously not the case in Michigan, and it's not a forestry waste. We have more ash. When we work on sargassum, which I don't believe that you have here, it's clearly there could be some arsenic in the feedstock, depending where you harvest, in fact, where you collect your sargassum in the Caribbean. So that's what I am mentioning about consistency of feedstock. We don't work under pressure, so it's pretty easy to feed. We need to have, let's say, 1 inch in dimension. So, and obviously, one of the challenge as well is that EPC, which are used to do oil and gas project refineries, they are not, let's say, comfortable with this type of feedstock. So, which means that having partners, players who know how to receive, manage, prepare the feedstock is essential. When we were visiting the site, when I saw, I don't know how you call it, in fact, when you unload your truck, I come from the waste incineration business. That's not the way that we receive waste. So that's another industry. So we need to connect, in fact, the two EPC to produce fuel with biomass production and preparation of biomass. But it's pretty, let's say, it's your comfort zone, it's not our comfort zone.
I would love to run virgin biomass as well. We're just not allowed to. It's a policy, it's politics, believe it or not. But we want to work on it. And what they did when they established the renewable, and Jordan will probably did this in his discussion, the EPA, in order for us to be a renewable fuel, we have to meet pathway approval. That's process and feedstock. So currently, the only feedstocks we're allowed to run are thinnings and slash, and they're goofy definitions for both. But mortalities, no. Quarter of your forest got whaled on by the ice storm, not allowed to touch them. Doesn't make any sense. But I'll just say those policies were put in place in 2004, and a lot of those they didn't expect us to reach, the cellulosics until 2015, and their mindset was if we open up too many feedstocks, we're going to have too many legal battles from all the people that are already in the forestry industry, worried about what's going to happen to their business. So let's make the barriers very tough. The stuff they absolutely don't want. We'll circle back in 2015 and start to reduce those policies. Well, here we are in 2025 and they haven't. And they actually apologized in 2021 and said, we know we were supposed to start on that in 2015, we're gonna start now. So they did reduce the standard a little bit by allowing us to ship intermediates. Before if we started with your wood chip, your slash, your thinning, we had to go all the way to, let's say, jet fuel on that piece of dirt. Now we're allowed to make an intermediate like the ester I talked about and ship it somewhere else to be finished because it makes more sense. It opens up more areas where we can process. So the policies will get changed, and it really just takes a system operating where we can go campaign and say, okay, now we have a solution. Let's expand this in a better way. My opinion, the state should be making the determination of what feedstocks are available. For example, down south, they have plantation pines. First harvest is considered thinnings. Yours are naturally, nature blesses you with natural replanting of your forests. So we don't get a first harvest like they do down south because you can't weed through this. So you are penalized here, and that's not right. And those are the things that we just need to work to resolve and change those policies. And they will happen. We just have to show that we're responsibly managing forests, like you guys have done for hundreds of years. Well, maybe not. Maybe not recently. I've seen some of the early photos of Michigan.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you both so much for sharing your time and expertise. How about a round of applause for everyone?